In this video, I'm going to tell you about my biggest regrets in wargaming. So I've been doing this whole tabletop wargaming thing, painting and building and playing and all that kind of stuff, for a decent amount of time now. There are plenty of people who've been doing it a lot longer than I have, but as the hobby grows, there's plenty of new people coming into the hobby every day. And that's kind of the mission here at Tabletop Minions, is to definitely be able to help the people who are coming in, and certainly be able to help people who've been doing it for a long time too, because even though you've been doing something for a long time doesn't mean that you can't continue to learn. But as somebody with a lot of experience, let's say, I figured it might be a good idea, after a conversation that I had with a viewer, it might be a good idea for me to try to list some of the regrets, some of the things that I wish I hadn't done or had done differently in my wargaming career, for lack of a better term. So I'm just going to kind of go through this list. It's not in any particular order, but if there are some regrets that you've got about tabletop wargaming, like what you've done, how you wish you'd have done it differently, leave those in the comments below. And if you're new to tabletop wargaming, take a peruse down there and find out what other people have done, so that you can live from their example and try not to end up having to be an example for others, like me and everybody else. One thing which I still, to some degree, regret to this day, and I don't mean that I'm still regretting something I did a long time ago, I mean I still keep doing it and still regretting it, but I'm trying to get better, is I don't work on enough terrain. I spend tons and tons of times, painting little people and squads and things like that. Like right now I'm on a tear for Kill Team, where I've gone through and painted, at this point I've got 5 squads done, and at least another 3 or 4, are on deck. But the problem is that I also have a whole bunch of terrain that I want to be able to get done. Stuff that I've purchased and either not built yet, or I've built it, but I haven't painted it yet, or I've even primed it, and that's as far as it's gotten. I've been getting better. Obviously, the stuff that came in Kill Team, I painted that up. If you want to go back and watch the video where I show off the Kill Team when it was first unboxed and all that stuff, and then see the terrain that I was able to crank out, frankly, pretty quickly. Pachow. But I'm trying to really fix that issue. Just recently, I bought some kind of 3-dimensionally molded plastic terrain, for the ground, rather than just using a flat, printed mat. Those are great, specifically if you're having to travel or take your stuff around. But for the battle reports that I want to do here, I want to have a nice looking 3D, cool looking, battleground to fight over. So I have done some priming and some painting and things like that on some stuff from Secret Weapon Miniatures. They're terrain tiles. I forget exactly what they're called. And then I also bought a Realm of Battle board from Games Workshop, and I already have the old desert one. I painted as a desert, but nonetheless, this is all coming. I've got a lot of stuff now primed, not just the battlefields, but also a lot of buildings, and I need to start really working hard to stop painting people at some point and go, okay, I now need to spend some time, not a ton of time, because it should go quickly, terrain should go quickly, but spend some time painting some terrain so I've got a really nice looking setup. Another thing that I regret from the start of at least my Warhammer 40,000 career, back in 5th edition, I regret selling my Tau. Now, back when I first got into 40K, I thought to myself, after looking at all the different armies and stuff, I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go with a Tau, because they look like they would be the fastest to paint, which is probably true. I did paint a bunch, and they did go pretty quickly. The downside is that they're not necessarily like the normal Fire Warriors. They take a bit of work to build because there's so many little parts. They're not push fit, let's just say that. So as a new modeler, it took me a little bit longer to get through them, but I did get some built, and I got some painted, and I got some Devilfish, like the vehicles kind of built and all that kind of jazz. I started playing games. But like I said, it was 5th edition, which means at that time, I think the Tau were in a 4th edition codex, and they were kind of widely regarded as terrible, I think is the word. They were just garbage. I lost nearly every game. And admittedly, I was a new 40K player, but I was losing badly most of the time. The only games I ever won was when I played against a friend of mine who always like just went for the kill, never kept his eye on the prize as far as the actual, objective. And so the only times I would win is if I could survive to the end of that, where you roll to see if it ends at the end of turn 5. And then I would be holding one objective and he would be holding none. And then I would win, even though I only had 2 guys left and none of his guys had been killed, that kind of thing. But right after I sold them, with a little bit of help, of course.
Cow for sale!
Right after that, the new book came out for the Tau, and then a bunch of new cool, giant, crazy robot monsters and whatnot, and all that kind of stuff. The ghost keels and I don't even know what the heck all of them are called. But if I would have stuck with that army, even if I just would have put it away for a while and said, I'm going to focus on something else, but I'm going to put this away for a little while, then when they got good again and came out with a bunch of really cool new big models and stuff like that, I could have maybe picked up a big model here or there and then brought out all my other stuff and kind of gone, down that road. So really think hard. Here's the tip. Really think hard if you are considering selling an army, because you might want to hold on to it. If you want to flip it because you need the money to be able to buy the next army, okay. But if you don't, maybe hold on to it. Put it in storage, put it in deep storage, someplace weird in your basement, in a nice plastic tub so it doesn't get wet, and then see how it goes. This is one that is related to both the Tau and also to the terrain one, but you'll understand. Basically, I really wish I would have bought an airbrush sooner. I tried painting a devilfish, one of those big Tau vehicles, with a brush. Did not look good, good at all. Big pieces of terrain and stuff like that, I still generally like to try, if I can, to prime it with a rattle can, because it will stick to the plastic really, really well, especially if you buy the right paint. But then when it's time to start doing the base coating and all the colors and things like that, airbrush just kills it. And airbrush allows you, if you live in a part of the country like I do, where you can't prime a bunch of time out of the year because it's either too humid or too snowy and icy or whatever the deal is, airbrush, and I've said this I don't know how many times on the channel, airbrush really, really, really helps out your hobby. I can't tell you how many times it would be getting into October, November, and I would just be waiting for that last possible day where it was maybe a high of 55 Fahrenheit and go out and try to spray as much stuff, prime as much stuff as I could so I would have things to paint over the winter. Now with an airbrush, it's easy. I can just kind of, whenever the whim strikes me, I can decide to go down to the basement with one model and just prime it up real quick and not waste a bunch of paint, not take a lot of time, get a great amount of coverage. Everything works out great. If you're thinking about an airbrush, and you really, really ought to, because it will help your output immensely, I've got a playlist, pachow, of a bunch of ways to get started with airbrushing, so maybe go through and watch those. Also related to my early painting career, I read someplace in the early 2000s that it was a good and quick way to paint your models, to dip them, okay? So if you're not familiar with that, it's probably for the best, but what people used to do, and some people still do, didn't work for me. Maybe it works great for you, but it didn't work out great for me. What you do in a dip situation is you take your model, you prime it, and then you paint very simple base coats, blue pants, red shirt, whatever the deal is, flesh tone, that kind of jazz. And then you don't do any washes or highlighting or dry brushing or anything. You just take the model and you just literally dunk it into a little, tin, a can of Minwax. And there was a lot of discussion online about what color was the best, burnt walnut or rusty brown or just all kinds of crazy, but you had to go to the hardware store and buy this little can and then dunk it in there. And then there were tons of people online who were trying to figure out ways to hold on to the model and then attach it to a hand drill so that once you dunked it in there and now your model was covered in this polyurethane goop, you would then take it outside and spin it around on the end of a drill to get all the excess off. And then what this idea was is it was basically kind of like a wash because it was getting into the recesses and the details. Plus it was also protecting your paint because it was coating it with an extremely thick layer of polyurethane. I did some models that way, and I wish I hadn't, and I would kind of like to strip them, but I'm very concerned about what kind of strip it's going to take to get that polyurethane off. You know, that polyurethane is designed predominantly for woodworking. And when you put it on, it's not designed to come off very easily. So, I mean, maybe like acetone. Some of the models I did were metal, so they would be fine. But some of them are plastic. And the chemical that's going to be strong enough to break down that dip is probably also going to break down the plastic. And so I kind of am concerned about that. Now, Army Painter makes a thing that's much like it. But I have found that it's a lot thinner in consistency, so I think that it's not going to glop on as thickly. Secondly, no matter what anyone tells you, never actually just dip the model. You know, I've found that if I take a brush that I don't care much about, like a really crappy one, and use that to actually brush on the Minwax, that worked better in the kind of throes, the end of my Minwax career. But man, I wish I hadn't have done that. It saves some time, but it makes a lot more mess. And I can't tell you how many times I dropped models like totally fully into the can because of what I was pinching them with, whatever. And that becomes a big mess as well. One of the last things is actually a relatively newer regret in that it is a newer, I don't want to say technology, but kind of. And that is Kickstarters. Not all of them. I've had some luck with Kickstarters, but I've also bought into a bunch of Kickstarters because they seemed like a really great deal. And they were, but then I ended up with a lot more models than I knew what to do with. And I'm betting that there's some of you out there who've been in that same situation. That the issue is that Kickstarters seem incredibly attractive at the time. You're going to be getting all this stuff. It's going to be spectacular. And that's great. And then, you know, a couple of years goes by, maybe a year, and then you finally get this humongous box full of plastic or resin or whatever it might be. And now you are in a situation where you have all of a sudden in one fell swoop dumped a whole bunch of work on your lap. And, you know, that's kind of a problem. Now, there are some Kickstarters out there where you're getting a very small amount of stuff maybe, and that's great. But a lot of Kickstarters, the way that they get, you know, the milkshake they use to get the boys to the yard, as it were, is generally, hey, look, if we hit all these stretch goals, you will get buried in plastic miniatures, and that will be cool, won't it? Well, yes and no, depends on the person. But for me, I've got a pile of shame in the basement, some of which I've sold and some of which I've not been able to because people are like, that's a lot of models. I don't want to, you know? And so being a little bit more cautious about those types of things, like the most recent Kickstarter that I did, I think I've only done one in 2018, and it was for the Hellboy game from Mantic. Now, that one I was interested in because the models are great, and there's going to be more models than I originally expected, but it's also kind of a gateway game, so you don't need all of them, specifically, like not to play. You can get away with a really small amount of them, and the other ones can kind of go into a queue that probably will never actually be activated. But, you know, still, I can paint some of them, and then being a gateway game, kind of like your Zombicide or like, you know, those types of games, it's something that I can then play with friends who don't play wargaming stuff, but maybe are interested in Hellboy, whether it's the movie or the comic or whatever. So that's the one Kickstarter that I pulled the trigger on this year, and it's because of a specifically, like it's a very strong effort on my part. There's things that come across and I go, oh, that would be a great deal I would get, but I've been holding myself back, and I think that at the very least the pile in my basement's going to be happier about it. So those are some of the regrets that I've had in wargaming in the past, and I want to, again, like I said, kind of tell you about them so that hopefully they don't strike you and make your wargaming life unhappy. If you've got some wargaming regrets, then, you know, like I said, throw them down in the comments below. I'm not normally a hey, comment below guy, but in this situation, I think we share this information. It can be great for other people, specifically new people coming in the hobby, to kind of words of warning to some degree on things that you may or may not want to do as you start this kind of journey into tabletop wargaming.